So welcome everyone. This is J Street at 10, and I'm Dan Kalick. I am the senior political advisor at Move On, which is the largest independent progressive political organization in the country. But that is not why they came and had me talk here today. I've only been at Move On for 3 months. In the 8.5 years before that time, I spent as a staff member of J Street. First as our national political director and later as the chief of staff. And what we're trying to do at this conference and what we're trying to dig into at this panel is, why did we create J Street 10 years ago? And it's our birthday, so how are we doing? Have we made progress in 10 years? Where do we need to go from here over the next 10 years? And where are things going? And so what this panel in particular is going to explore is two of the main areas that J Street has focused on: the Hill and the campaign trail. And luckily we have someone who's involved in both of that here today. But, you know, when we came together a little over 10 years ago and started talking about the concept of J Street, what we thought what was missing from those advocating for a more diplomatic approach to the Middle East was that there was a broken politics in this country, here in the United States, about how people running for office and how people sitting in Congress talked and thought about issues related to Israel and the Middle East and issues related to the American Jewish community. And there was this simplification sold to a lot of people who are my good friends, because campaign consultants can be a little bit lazy when it comes to dealing with small groups and populations around this country. And they said, if you want support from the American Jewish community, here's what your position needs to be on these key issues. And there wasn't a lot of room for people to really look at not supporting Israel, meaning whatever the current coalition government puts forward is what my position is on what it means to be pro-Israel, but what is actually in Israel's long-term interest to be the Jewish and democratic home that so many of us spend time in, have cousins there, and believe in, and believe is essential for its survival over its next 70 years. And so we built an organization that tried to demonstrate to members of Congress and to people running that there was a deep and meaningful support from the thousands of people that are here in DC and hundreds of thousands around the country that would vote for you, that would volunteer for your campaign, and that would donate money to you specifically to bring forward that nuanced pro-Israel, pro-peace message that we now see is the mainstream, in my view, positioning and posture of the Democratic Party as it approaches issues of war and peace, issues of a two-state solution, and of course, as we saw, the historic signing of a diplomatic deal with Iran that was able to prevent a nuclear proliferation deal that was able to prevent Iran from going nuclear without firing a single shot. And I think for those of us who got involved in politics, specifically around the Iraq War and probably the worst foreign policy mistake we've seen in 50 years, to see the absolute opposite move forward and for Democrats to stand strong and understand that the politics was with them to do that was a seminal moment for this organization. So, you definitely did not come here to just listen to me babble. You all probably know my email and my cell phone, so call me later. But we're here with two esteemed panelists. Starting all the way over the left, we have Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland's 8th Congressional District, right up here in Maryland. He's very popular, one, because many of his constituents can get here very easily, and two, because he is one of the most important rising voices for the progressives on a whole host of issues in Congress, and in his short time there has made a huge impact, and a lot of us see him as our future hope to really drive the party to a place that we can believe in. He spent 10 years prior to this in the state Senate in Maryland as the voice in Maryland, pushing forward a whole host of great progressive issues, and he's also a constitutional law scholar, not just a non-practicing lawyer like myself. Next to Jamie is Nancy Soderberg, who will be joining him very shortly because she's running for Congress in Florida's 6th Congressional District. This is a seat left vacant by a much smaller and lesser person who will not be in Congress next time, which is great. And this is one of those seats, people always say we need 23 to win. We need 23 to win back the House. Well, the truth is, if you want any chance in getting to 23, you really need to put 40 or 50 seats in play, because we don't know where those 23 are exactly going to come from. It's not just the so-called Hillary seats. And this is that exact type of seat in Florida that is going to be extremely competitive. And if we win seats like that, we are going to be able to pull the emergency brake on some of Donald Trump's worst policies. And I'm very excited to work with Nancy Soderberg when she is a congresswoman next time. What we should know about Nancy is that she spent 30 years working on the intersection of foreign policy and politics. She was Bill Clinton's deputy national security advisor. She was the ambassador to the UN. She runs a consulting firm now. She also teaches as a professor in Florida on these issues. She's worked on 4 presidential campaigns. She worked for Ted Kennedy in the Senate. She understands more than most people in this room how foreign policy decisions are made, and what, if any, political influence can shape both the decision process, but also how it's messaged and brought out to the public. So I'm very excited to hear from Nancy here as well today, and to work with her when she's in Congress and I'm at Move On. So with that, let's start with where things were, and then go to where things are. Does that work for you guys, or do you want to start present and go backwards? You don't care. So, Congressman Raskin, you're on the Hill today. How do you see issues related to Israel, a two-state solution, how members of Congress relate to the American Jewish community playing out today? And was the J Street experiment, did it work? Or have things changed? Do people see a more nuanced view? Do they understand that they can be pro-Israel without being anti-Palestinian or anti-Arab?
First, thank you for having me. I'm just delighted to be here with everybody from J Street. And happy birthday, J Street. 10th birthday is a big birthday. I should also say, Dan, before starting, that Jeremy, Ben-Ami, and a bunch of the other leaders of J Street live in my district. So I'm their representative. I also have a lot of the leadership of AIPAC that lives in my district. And so for me, solving the Middle East crisis is a form of constituent service. So I got to get that done while I'm in office. So the answer to your question is yes. I think that these are tough times. These are dark times. But I'm quoting my dad here, who used to say that if you think you're in a situation that's hopeless, you're the hope. And so the people in this room are the hope. At a dark time, you're the light. You are the light. And so I'm thrilled to be here with you. I would say that that J Street's first 10 years has been a very successful experiment for American politics, for Middle East policy, and for the state of Israel. I think for all of it, J Street has opened up conceptual space, it's opened up political space, and it's opened up ethical space. And the conceptual space is simply to say that you can be a very staunch champion of the state of Israel and also be in serious, authentic pursuit of a two-state solution and a meaningful peace process. And politically, it has created the space for people to say that and to fight for that and to make that safe both within the halls of government and also within people's congressional districts and when they're out arguing. And ethically, I think it has made it a lot easier for people to bring their politics and their conscience together in the field. I grew up with Rabbi Hillel's dictum, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am for myself only, then who am I? And if not now, when? And the last line underscoring the urgency of thinking about ourselves, our own security, our own peace, and also the security and the peace of others. which go together. So I would say that the stage is set for some big breakthroughs. I want to believe that with respect not just to the Mideast, but all over the world. You guys know that democracy is under attack. Liberal principles are under attack. Human rights are under attack. From Putin's Russia to Duterte's Philippines to Erdogan's Turkey to the Saudi kingdom. You name it. Everywhere, liberal democracy is under attack. So the movement for democracy and human rights and peace in the Middle East is a movement for democracy and human rights and peace everywhere. And we know that the dictators, the autocrats, the kleptocrats, the bullies have found each other, and that means that the movements for peace and social justice and human rights all over the world, we've got to find each other too.
Thank you, Congressman. My first couple months at J Street, and they said, Dan, just go do politics. There was like 8 of us, and we were sitting around a small office that we sublet. And so I started cold calling first-time congressional candidates. And I said, we are J Street. We're interested in talking to you about your campaign and our views on Israel and diplomacy in the Middle East. And then most people said, who? Then they Googled us, and then they hung up the phone. When I left J Street 4 months ago, every single Democrat, and some Republicans, but every single Democrat who is running for the House, and there are more candidates running this cycle than ever before, every single sitting member of the Democratic caucus, every single sitting senator running in places like North Dakota and Indiana and Missouri, were knocking down J Street's door to try and meet with me. I don't think I'm that interesting a person to meet with. But something clearly had changed in the last 10 years about how Democrats thought about an organization that said, we're very much pro-Israel, but we're also pro-peace. We want to support your campaign, from who are you, why should I talk to you, I'm told that this is some sort of toxic new organization, to how can I get a meeting, how can I get your support? So I guess you're running for Congress right now, and you're endorsed by J Street PAC. Why did you call and sit with Ilya and Aaron, and why did you want the J Street endorsement, and what do you think that means for candidates running in today's environment?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you very much for the support, the endorsement, and this extraordinary crowd there. It's always fun to see to Jamie. I remember very well when Jeremy Bennett called me 10 years ago, probably 11 now, saying, I think we're going to do this. And I think he tapped into a need to open up a space to kind of have a different point of view, but also to try and create a movement that is no longer an experiment. This is a 10-year decades of building support for goals and shared values that represent, as Jamie was saying, a core fundamental American value. As a candidate for Congress, I have a lot of Jewish constituents. I went to the Jewish Heritage Festival for the upcoming 70th anniversary in Florida yesterday, and I think people are nervous about what's happening in the Middle East. They're nervous about what's happening with Iran in particular. We've just handed Syria over to the Iranians on a silver platter. And I think the more you can have experts who can say, here's how to look at it, here's the facts that can be there. So I called on J Street because I believe in the mission and I believe in the support. I've followed you for 10 years, and running for Congress, you need all the help you can get. This is a difficult seat for myself, running in a Republican-leaning district, and so I'm doing absolutely everything I can. But I also want to take my hat off for the 10 years of record of success. Having worked on 4 presidential campaigns, the Senate, the White House, politics never drive a real decision. I've never seen all the folks that I've worked for. Honestly, we're trying to do what was best for America. And groups like J Street can help put those in context, but in my view, most importantly, raise the red flag when you need to know about something coming up, because it's like a fire hose when you're running for office and when you're in office. And so the more you can have relationships and people come in and say, this is really important, and here's the 3 talking points so you don't have to spend all night writing them yourself, can just be crucial. And I think you've developed a real role in American politics and foreign policy that will continue not just the next 10 years, but well past our time in politics.
Thank you. Congressman, I'd like you to talk about the political side as well. I mean, you ran in what I believe at the time was the most expensive congressional primary in history. You had about 37 opponents, if I remember correctly, and you emerged victorious, and it was a really interesting race. As we're seeing these candidates running across the country, really trying to find some daylight between them and their candidates, how can we use foreign policy as one tool to really show and demonstrate that you're the real progressive champion fighter that's going to get you through a Democratic primary in today's environment?
So, yes, for those 8th District Marylanders who are out there, you will recall we had the most, go CD8. Thank you all for being here. I've got the greatest constituents in the world, and it was the most expensive primary in U.S. history. I think it was $21 million spent in the primary. Not by me, I hasten to add. We were outspent 9-1. We were outspent 50-1 on TV. We only had one TV ad the last week of the campaign just so we could say we had a TV ad, but nobody saw it. But we had a very strong, progressive, grassroots organizing campaign, and we went door to door. We had 169 events in people's living rooms, in their backyards, where we would have real conversations about complicated things like climate change and gun violence in the Middle East, the things that you can't do in a 30-second attack ad against somebody. But we have a very politically engaged and educated constituency, and so people were paying attention and got the point about it. And I was listed as one of the J Street people too, and that meant a lot to me to have that validation from J Street. So, I think that, we live in a time of tremendous flux and transition, and it helps, as Nancy was saying, to connect people who are running for office who have very little time to think, much less read and write seriously, with people who are thinking and reading and writing deeply about the field. I think that's going to make an important difference. For me, going back to kind of what I started by saying in terms of political and ethical space, my grandfather, who some people here know, is Ambassador Sam Kaplan, still in the room. Yes, you guys know the great Sam Kaplan from Minnesota, who was ambassador to Morocco. But he's a big-time force in Minnesota politics. My grandfather was the first Jewish person ever elected to the Minnesota state legislature back in the 1930s. And he was DFLer, Democrat Farm Labor Party. He was a progressive New Dealer. He was friends with Mondale and Humphrey and the Minnesota progressive tradition. He was a strong labor person, and he was a strong progressive Zionist. And for me, meeting the people from J Street allowed me to reconnect with the roots of my grandfather, who was somebody who was deeply involved in progressive politics throughout the 20th century, and felt that his passion and his commitment for Israel were very much connected to the kind of world that he was fighting to build in America and everywhere else.
Can I follow up a little bit? Last night you said something that really struck me, which is no one in this room questions that you can be pro-American and at the same time, in your pro-Americanness, attack Donald Trump and his policies. Why can't we be pro-Israel and attack the certain policies of the current Netanyahu coalition government and what it decides to do? Can you speak to that?
I couldn't have said it better myself. I agree with it even more hearing you say it. Your patriotism in America is not determined by how much you support Donald Trump or the incumbent regime. On the contrary, the first imperative of patriots is to support their country against their government when their government's wrong. That's what it means to be a patriot. And so if we don't have to support our own president when our president is wrong, why do we have to support anybody else's president or prime minister when they're wrong? That can't be the test of anybody's loyalty to human rights or democracy or justice on earth. And if I wouldn't want to support Trump or Netanyahu policies in America, why do I have to support Trump or Netanyahu policies in Israel? I think it's my obligation as a progressive person to stand up for progressive movements and forces and human rights and peace all over the world.
Thank you. Getting a little more policy heavy, the Iran nuclear deal, it was very hard to negotiate that. It involved many countries. It took a very long time. I don't think anyone views the deal as perfect, but most people that you talk to in the proliferation space say this is the gold standard of what you have ever seen someone agree to in terms of the types of verification and the types of real accountability to prevent Iran from going nuclear, and the entire world has put its stamp of approval. So I guess my question to you is, what can we do, supporters of the deal, knowing that the only thing that stands from us and a removal from it is Donald Trump? I mean, what messages should we be sending? What should we be saying on the trail? What should we be saying in Congress? And what should we be saying as activists?
Well, to me, the biggest threat we face right now is the fact an Iranian nuclear state. And the nuclear deal, I think, stopped it dead in its track, deferred it, at least a decade. I'd like to see it a permanent. I'd like to see it negotiated so that it includes the ballistic missile program, its support for Hamas and Hezbollah, its human rights record. But every single one of those problems will be worse if Iran has a nuclear weapon. If we pull out of that deal unilaterally, the target's going to be on our back, and Iran will be free to get a nuclear weapon, and I think that's just wrong. So I would encourage everyone in J Street to mobilize to make sure that we pressure us to not pull out of that deal. It's not a perfect deal. No deal is perfect. But the United States is more secure with us in that deal than without. Now, the president put 120-day time clock ticking that's going to happen in May. I honestly have given up predicting what this president's going to do, but I think there's a really good chance that he could pull out of it. And I think it's going to be dependent on our allies in the Middle East, everyone in the region to say don't. And I would urge you to, right now is the time to do it, get out and talk to the administration, talk to the members of Congress, talk to the Europeans, the Israelis. We do not want to, we have to find a way to get off that cliff. And to me, that's something that I think J Street has already played an important role in supporting the Iran nuclear deal. And I think now's the time to do that in spades. I'm very worried about this. And I think what's happening in Syria is just giving the region to Iran on a silver platter, as I said. And we need to all mobilize to try and stop that today. And I think everyone in this room can have a role in that is critical.
Thank you. When Donald Trump ran for president, he went around the country and he said, I'm going to get us out of all these dumb wars. We should be putting money to building bridges here and not wasting trillions of dollars abroad. He just made John Bolton his national security advisor. Mike Pompeo is about to go to the Senate for confirmation as Secretary of State. Gina Haspel is going to be, at least likely, replacing him at the CIA. Congressman, where do we see Trump going with his foreign policy, and how can we make an issue of should we make a complete issue of the hypocrisy of what he ran on, what he's doing now, or are there better messages to call him out for unpopular positions and to really take back the mantle of what a reasonable foreign policy looks like in the world. How would you advise Democrats on that?
Yeah, I don't know how much mileage there really is in the hypocrisy point. I mean, I think people who are looking for consistency in foreign policy or domestic policy, or even in just statements from minute to minute long ago abandoned Donald Trump. The most ferocious, militaristic, hawkish wing of the Republican Party now seems to have ensconced itself in the administration. They're taking over. So I think that we have to make, on our side of the aisle, we have to make as much common cause as we can with the Republicans who are interested in maintaining peace and, preventing the outbreak of world war. I mean, look at what's going on in Syria today. I mean, how many nuclear powers are involved in that? There's Russia, there's the U.S., there's France, there's the U.K. It could have been Iran, I mean, had we not had the Iran nuclear agreement. But, I mean, things are a tinderbox all over the world. So I think that we have to blow the whistle on militarism, explain that, this is an administration that lost the popular vote by 3 million votes, at probably the peak of its popularity, and it is representing a small minority of the country in terms of views on domestic and foreign policy. And, as Mr. Comey's been pointing out the last few days, we simply can't put the fate of the country, much less the whole earth, in the hands of this one guy. So we've got to do whatever we can to pull back from the brink around the world. This is a moment where we need the wisest possible leadership, not the most foolish leadership that there is.
This is an individual who is assaulting our democracy on so many levels. Like many of you, I've spent my career promoting democracy and human rights around the world. I never thought I'd have to do it here at home. But our democracy is at risk, not just on the foreign policy and the potential of the military first approach as opposed to diplomacy first. I look at it as that scene at the end of The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy finally gets to the wizard show that's going on there, and he said, "Don't look at what's going on with that man behind the curtain." I want to know what's going on behind the curtain because it frightens me. We're trying to privatize public education, eviscerate our EPA, trying to essentially run the gambit, the playbook that dictators around the world have had. We're beating up on the press, corruption, and trying to eviscerate our courts. But it's not going to work here. I am so proud of the American public standing up to this presidency. Look at our press, they're fighting him. Look at our courts, they're fighting him. And the American people are going to send him the strongest message in November that this is wrong and we know what's right. You can feel this wave of taking it back across the country. Women are running. Emily's List was working with 1,000 women in 2016. They're working with 34,000 women this time. 34,000 women. And those kids, there's 4 million of those kids who are 17 now and who are going to vote in November. And it is a movement like I've never seen. And on the foreign policy front, I have great fear because Donald Trump has kicked out the voices of reason around him. But I do think the American public and the Congress are going to say no. And it's always whoever was the last person to talk to him in the room. They're going to all of a sudden get back into TPP. It's a little late. We're going to renegotiate NAFTA. So we'll see what he does on the Iran deal. But I think the voices of the American people standing up are making a difference. So be loud, be active, go vote, and flip the House.
I mean, to that point, as much as this president wants to feel he's the king of this country, he's not. And there are checks and balances in our Constitution and in our Congress can play a role even in the minority. And if he wants to assemble a war cabinet, he doesn't get to put whoever he wants into those positions. And Pompeo will be the first one that's voted on. Rand Paul has already said he's going to vote no. So there is bipartisan potential rejection of his nominee for Secretary of State. And I know those of you who are staying here on Tuesday to lobby with J Street will be asking senators, vote no on Pompeo. And if all of the Democrats or independents that caucus with Democrats join Rand Paul, that's enough votes to stop a Secretary of State nomination. It would be a historic moment. It's an uphill battle, but I think it will send a signal that some of these views of being, pro-regime change in Iran and North Korea, the anti-Muslim rhetoric, the anti-LGBT rhetoric, the global gag rule, on steroids. I mean, these are things that are outside of the mainstream of foreign policy that we should not accept. And I think as citizens, we can stand up with J Street and the 180 other groups that have opposed Pompeo's nomination and really send a signal. And I think it's important to do it even in an election year. That's my commentary. One more question. We do want to get to. Let me ask one more question, and then this is your warning that you should start thinking now of your questions. We are going to go to audience questions. We have a microphone in the center of the room, and the normal caveat that please don't give a speech, give a question, have it end in a question mark, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. But there's something that came up in the last panel for those who were here. What Mika pointed out from Third Way, the long-standing gap between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in terms of who you trust on foreign policy. The so-called mommy and daddy parties, images of the Democratic Party, and that there's been a couple times where we've broken through, but over the course of 40 years, that's a pretty consistent thing, and it's something that she fears may impact us even in good elections coming up. So I guess I'll ask you, as someone on the campaign trail, how do we break through? How do we narrow that gap? And how can someone like you with such a deep and rich foreign policy background be a good messenger on those messages?
It's one of the things that drive me absolutely crazy, having worked on foreign policy campaigns for the last 30 years. And certainly after the biggest debacle we made in going into Iraq, that still persists, is a failure in the Democratic Party to try and put our message out more coherently. I mean, we're not as good as the robot messaging, and I love that. Who would want to be part of a party that did that? But I think that it's the same thing on the narrative on fiscally conservative. When's the last time did a Republican balance the budget? And this tax cut that we just got, $1.5 trillion added to the deficit. And having watched Bill Clinton balance the budget and leave a surplus, it was painful to see it squandered away, and we're back to square one. So I think Democrats have to be a little bit more rigorous about what is our message. The Republican, goes from president's tweet to Fox News to the member's ear, and we need a little bit stronger, more honed message of we're the party that keeps America safe. We're the party that keeps us safe. And we're going to have some opportunities there. I don't know what's going to happen in the summit in North Korea, but it's not going to solve the problem. As I said, I'm worried about Iran, and Syria is increasingly a major threat to U.S. interests and to Israel's interest in the region. So I think we need to be much more vocal about we are the party of security, safety, and we'll stand up for American values. And I think that resonates with the American people. So I think we all have to get there. It does matter who's in the White House in terms of our own security.
Well, let me just add to that. I think that we need to hone the message. It's true, but the message is just reflective of what the program is. And I think we need to hone the program, the politics that create the message. In 2016, Donald Trump ran to Hillary Clinton's left on a whole bunch of issues. When he went to Pennsylvania and Ohio and Indiana and Wisconsin, he was attacking the free trade agreement, saying that the Democrats have sold you out with NAFTA and GATT and TPP. He was attacking the Iraq War and Hillary Clinton's vote for the Iraq War. He was attacking her on Wall Street. There's a lot of confusion in the public about where the parties stood on different things. We have to make clear that we recover our roots as the progressive party of the New Deal that built Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. We built the last half century of progress for America, and that's where we clearly have to stand. And we need a program that continues in that tradition, and the message will go out to the people that the Democratic Party is here to stand for the vast majority of Americans and not for the 1% that made off with $1.5 trillion in the tax bill. I said on the floor on Friday, I said that they came to town saying that they were going to drain the swamp. They actually moved into the swamp and they drained the Treasury instead.
All right, we're going to go to audience questions, starting with Ed Witten.
Yes, I want to make a short comment on the way we frame the objectives of J Street, because I feel the point of J Street isn't to criticize certain policies of the Israeli government, but to explain to our policymakers in our country that we've been dissatisfied with U.S. policies that do not effectively advance a two-state solution and promote our values in resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As a J Street member since the inception, my interest has always been to criticize my own government's ineffective policies. And that's why I've been with J Street.
I think that's a very good point. Larry, go ahead.
I'm standing here looking at the J Street sign that says a political home for pro-Israel, pro-peace Americans. And since I've been involved with J Street, the two-state solution and our advocacy for the two-state solution has basically been the mantra. Yesterday, Peter Beinart got on the stage and said the two-state solution is on life support and we have to come to grips with other issues. I've always felt that J Street was a home for values-based Jewish Americans on a whole broad range of issues where we can state our honest opinions without being thrown out of the room if we say the wrong thing. So my question is, as we look toward the next 10 years, and the landscape on the ground and the issues we're facing today, most of the conversation today has been about Trump and policies, not about Israel. And I think, and would like to know how you feel about J Street redefining and perhaps rebranding itself as a home for values, people in the country who define themselves in terms of our values, as opposed to in terms of victimhood and our external vulnerabilities as other pro-Israel organizations do.
I'll answer. Why not? Look, I think that, I'll answer it. Because, look, we created J Street because there were millions of American Jews that felt our voice was not being heard in Washington. And one of the reasons was because of the distortion created by groups on the right around the Israel issue. And most of us come here and drive and care deeply about Israel, its future, and a two-state solution, and that's never going to not be a part of what J Street does. But that doesn't mean that J Street can't make sure that our voices aren't heard on a whole host of issues that we care about, because we are a political and advocacy operation built to lift up voices that were just not present in the Washington conversation and that represented the majority of the community. So I think it's a both and to the Larry question. And I'm sorry as moderator to answer question, but.
I'll jump in so you don't have only one answer on that. But I think that, I was involved in discussions when J Street started as well, and it was very much on the Israeli issue, but it was also a broad values issue. And look at your mantra right now is voice for today, vision for tomorrow. So I would absolutely encourage J Street to be a voice for democracy and human rights throughout the United States and the world. It is important. And all of our interests in Israel are threatened if all those other things are going in the wrong direction. And I'm deeply concerned about the direction that this country is taking right now and across the world, the xenophobism, the anti-Semitism. When you have this wave of Nazism and fascism, I've got people dropping Ku Klux Klan leaflets in Daytona Beach in 2018. That's just wrong. So I can't encourage you enough to take on the broader issues, because they're all come back to who we are as a people, and it does also relate to Israel, as your initial Heller quote in kind. So I would welcome that suggestion. I'm not on the board or part of the those who decide it, but I think absolutely that should be part of the next 10 years.
Hello, hi, I'm Terri Altera. I'm a senior at American University. I just wanted to ask quickly, maybe not quickly, but I just wanted to ask, while J Street has definitely gained more influence among the Democratic Party, there's still been like a few holdouts and a few tense situations where J Street has not been able to break through. Most recently, we saw this in Illinois' 3rd District, and I'm sorry if this brings some of the panelists in an uncomfortable situation, which I apologize in advance, where we had Mary Newman, who was endorsed by J Street, challenge Dan Lipinski, who was more with the mainline AIPAC position and all that too, and she unfortunately lost. However, as a result of her loss, some people have argued that it basically reiterates a message that we can't really go too far to the left on certain topics such as Israel. And I was just wondering what you thought of this narrative, and are there ways to counter this narrative? Because I know Connor Lamb got J Street's endorsement and he won his district, so yeah.
Thanks for the question. I want to tell you a story about the center in politics, because I know this is sort of the lingua franca of politics. Are you too far to the right, too far to the left, who's in the center, and so on. And so the very first time I ran for office was in 2006. And I've been a law professor for my whole career. I've done it now for more than a quarter century. And and I've written, dozens of law review articles and books and stuff like that. So my positions were pretty well known. And so when I made my announcement that I was going to run, I laid out everything that I wanted to do. I wanted in Maryland, and I was running against a rather conservative Democrat who had introduced a pro-Iraq war resolution, had been introduced electricity deregulation that made everybody's bills go up, had been blockading marriage equality and so on. So I laid out everything I wanted to do. I said I wanted to pass marriage equality. I wanted to abolish the death penalty in our state. I wanted to restore voting rights for the former felons. I wanted to pass the toughest gun safety law in America. I wanted to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and I went through the whole thing. And a woman came up to me afterwards. She said, "Jamie, great speech. I loved your speech. But one thing, take out all that stuff you've got in there about gay marriage." This is in 2006. She said, because it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Everybody's opposed to it. Even the gay candidates won't talk about it. And it makes you sound like you're really extreme and like you're not in the political center. And so I had to kind of swallow hard, because I was running against a 32-year incumbent who was president pro tem in the Maryland Senate, and I didn't have that many supporters with me that day, and I didn't want to offend her. But I said, thank you for telling me that, because it makes me realize that it's not my ambition to be in the political center. It's my ambition to be in the moral center. And that's why I'm a progressive, and that's why I'm a Democrat. Our job is to try to find what's right the best we can and bring the political center to us, even if it's not there yet. Politics at its best is about education and moving people there. So I don't know the details of the race that you're referring to. I think that candidate got something like 47 or 48% of the vote, very first time running, which is extraordinary. That's hardly a stinging rebuke or defeat from the people. And on every single thing that I said I wanted to work on in Maryland, we did it. We abolished the death penalty. We became the first state in the union to pass marriage equality without being told we had to do so by our state Supreme Court. We restored voting rights to ex-felons. We banned assault weapons. We banned high-capacity magazines. Right down the line, we got it all done. And that's how I ran for Congress, and it's why I ran for Congress, because I think that we can actually get these things done when we get the right people in office.
Jason Berkovich from San Diego. I wanted to piggyback off of that a little bit. Haaretz had a good write-up about this morning when they were comparing what C.V. Livni said yesterday versus what the president of J Street U said. I know Israel Policy Forum has kind of had a good write-up about this as well. It seems like in many cases we look at Gaza and the Israelis are saying we're defending ourselves, and you have a lot of people here in the States that are saying you guys are killing too many Gazans. As an elected official who's voting on legislation or as a candidate, how can we potentially bridge that gap using legislation and using messaging where maybe this isn't all Israel doing everything wrong, this isn't the Gazans doing everything wrong, but there's multiple elements that are doing things wrong, and we have to find a way to bridge that. So love to hear legislatively as also as a candidate.
Well, thank you for the question. You know, the purpose of politics, of course, is not to cast blame and point fingers and talk about how bad everything is and all the dangers and perils that exist, but to try to find a pathway forward, to try to find the light that's in the darkness. And obviously, if the peace process is completely frozen and at a standstill and there's no forward motion, that's a recipe for disaster. I was in Israel, and we were in Israel, in Jordan, and Afghanistan the week before the marches began at Gaza, and people were telling us that Gaza was a tinderbox and that there was going to be a terrible conflagration there based on 50% youth unemployment or higher and the terrible situation that existed. Obviously, Israel has a right and a duty to defend itself, but it also has the duty to use proportionate force in dealing with any kind of threat to the country, like every other country on earth. So the real issue is what we can do to get out of a situation of complete deadlock, to move the peace process forward and to move the dynamics towards a real two-state solution while we're trying to respect everybody's right to peace and security and civil rights as we get there.
I would just add that these things are virtually, nothing's ever impossible, but it's very hard to address those issues through legislation. And in my experience in the Senate and the White House and the UN, it really is incumbent on the U.S. to lead on these issues. And I think we've got a void right now. Maybe the president's coming up with a plan that will actually move things forward. I actually hope they do. I think Jared Kushner's probably a little distracted right now. But it's important, and I think it's incumbent on everyone in this room to try and keep the pressure for where is the plan, what is the plan, where is the president's leadership on this, because we need it. Voids don't help in these kinds of situations, and I think we need to get back to trying to have a peace plan that actually has a hope of going somewhere, and I'm afraid it's going in the wrong direction right now.
Hi, I'm Debra Fogle from the Boston area. I heard yesterday for the first time a rather horrifying acronym, PEP, Progressive Except for Palestine. And I'm wondering if the candidate and member of Congress could comment on how much of a force you find that among the voters that you meet and what you think the best way of dealing with it is. And I also have a question for Dan. You mentioned that there are some Republicans who are looking for J Street endorsements. I just wondered if you could talk about that a little bit more, if you have an opportunity. Thank you.
So it was PEP, Progressive.
I'd not heard that before.
Okay, so look, Israel exists in an extremely dangerous and turbulent region. There is no doubt about it, and it has faced mortal and lethal threats to its existence since 1948, when it was first recognized. And the Arab-Israeli conflict has obviously gone through a number of different periods of turbulence and conflict with different aggressors and different enemies and so on. And so I think that, lots of people, like, for example, my late grandfather, saw Israel very much as the underdog and as besieged and had to put not just Israeli security first, but almost exclusively in their mind. That's all that they were, thinking about. Today, obviously, Israel is a major military power, on earth. It also has been able to make friends with lots of the Arab states, other than Iran, which continues to be, a destabilizing influence in the region, as well as a huge human rights threat to its own people. Israel's security is far more secure than it's far stronger than it was before. Look, I think that the public, and especially the national Jewish community, can handle both thoughts, that Israel's security has got to be made effective and paramount so that it is safe as a state, at the same time that the situation of the Palestinians is seriously and meaningfully addressed, and that there's peace movement forward towards a two-state solution. And that movement towards a two-state solution is one that solidifies Israeli security rather than undermines it. I think people are ready to have that conversation, and I think people are serious about it and understand the very complicated dynamics of the region and the history.
Hi, my name is Bennett Decker. I'm a student at Columbia University. First of all, I want to thank you both for being here today. This was really amazing. You talked earlier, Congressman, about making the moral center also the political center. And I guess my question is how? I know that I recognize this as a big question, but I read the poster behind you, the political home for pro-Israel, pro-peace Americans. If I read that poster to most of the people on my campus, I think they would go, yeah, duh. And yet, J Street has not as wide of the reach as I think the people in this room would like it to have. And beyond that, I'm coming from a more right-wing Israel background up until this point that I'm in the process of recovering from. It's been a long road. I used to be very involved with AIPAC, and I think that a lot of the people who adamantly oppose and slander J Street at AIPAC conferences would probably agree with that without the logo of the J with the arrow on top. And I wonder how it is we're able to detach the stigma that exists around J Street from the work that J Street actually does. Because I'll be honest and I'll be blunt, I think that it's lunacy to propose that the center is anywhere other than a two-state solution. And I think that allowing room for people who don't support the two-state solution to call themselves centrists is fundamentally detrimental to the entire project at work here. And so I want to know your thoughts on how we make that happen. I know that's a big question.
Well, do you want to go first, Nancy?
I would just say get more youth like you involved. I'm a professor, and I feel that, we're not going to fundamentally change the nature of this globe anymore, but your generation is. And I am so proud of this generation. They don't question climate change. They don't question what your sexual preference is. They don't question anything but getting out there and doing it. And they're going to be voting in November. So talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues, start building that movement, because you can do it. J Street's already built itself up 10 years where it's made a huge impact. But get involved and, get some of it. It's up to the youth of this country to change it, honestly. So thank you for being here.
That's my answer, too. And I just want to add a specific recommendation, because my campaigns have always been built around high school and college-age students. We're taking, I don't have vigorous opposition in my first re-election run here. Although the Washington Post called me and said, what do you think about your opponent? I wasn't aware I had an opponent at that point. I said, who's my opponent? They said, it's somebody named Spring Summer. And I said, well, I'm a candidate for all seasons. So that's it. But what I'm doing, because our situation is so serious here, is I'm taking the project that I've always had as part of my campaign, which is called Democracy Summer, where we educate young people about the history of social change and the role young people have played in it, and we educate them about climate change and about income inequality and gun violence and so on. And then we teach them how to organize, to do online organizing, do phone banking, door knocking, voter registration. And we're taking that from Maryland, and we're going to be in Virginia, where we helped in 2017 with that spectacular victory for the Democrats there. We're going to New Jersey. We're going to Pennsylvania, which is ground zero because of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's great decision on redistricting. And we're going to Iowa. So if you
come to Florida.
Well, actually, that's our next stop. We got to raise the money for Florida, but I've talked to Ted Deutsch and the Parkland students, and they're definitely very interested in our coming to Florida too. And we know with Nancy's race, a number of races there are really winnable races. So this is the opportunity to do it. You know, we can. Somebody showed me a picture of some graffiti which said, "If you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own," and that's up to your generation. And working together, we can do it. Because Nancy's right, you've gotten beyond racism and anti-Semitism and homophobia. You guys don't read a lot of books. You read a lot of tweets. But if we can get you guys reading some more books, you guys are going to be the model generation for all time.
My niece said to me the other day, she said, Aunt Nancy, I really admire your generation. I said, well, thank you, Fraser. Why? She goes, because you know all that stuff and you don't have Siri.
So we're running low on time, so let's take the last two questions, and then if you guys can respond to both of them and any closing remarks you have.
Okay. I'm Bruce Kutnick, a proud constituent of Jamie Raskin. Okay. My question is, have you or will you sponsor legislation to set aside from the U.S. assistance to Israel an amount of money into an escrow account that equaling the amount of money that the Israeli government spends on settlements, roads, and infrastructure in the West Bank? Have this legislation require that it be monitored and reported by congressional research organizations, either the Congressional Budget Office or the Government Accountability Office, thus bypassing the Trump administration? In 2007, I worked on a similar issue in which Senator Levin asked us to look at the Iraqi budget and see whether or not the United States should continue to provide assistance to the government of Iraq. And I was working in the GAO, and we found $42 to $52 billion that the government of Iraq had squirreled away. Some of it was being invested in U.S. government treasury bonds, so they were receiving interest from us. So I'm interested in whether or not you will be willing to sponsor this type of legislation.
Let's take the last question and then we'll answer both. So the question is, legislation to put funds in an escrow equal to the money that goes to settlements. And what's the last question?
First of all, thank you on the panel. Thank you for all your good work. I'm a Democrat, have been my whole life, give a lot to democratic causes. I'm also been involved in J Street from the very beginning. I'm also an opinion researcher, and I live in Massachusetts, but I grew up in a Republican district. So I understood before the election that there was a lot going on that wasn't being understood by the Democratic Party. I also watched in horror as the Democratic Party shot itself regularly in the foot. Despite all the horrible things that, you know, this ignorant sociopath we have as a president now did, there was lots of stuff that went on. Yesterday, Peter Beinart said in a moment of anger, if Chuck Schumer doesn't respond to what we feel, we have to get rid of Chuck Schumer. And there was a lot of clap for that. That, to me, signals again what I fear, which is what you've sort of talked about, that somehow the Democratic Party doesn't get across its message, that somehow the Democratic Party involves itself in internecine kind of conflict. How do we prevent that? How do we focus on what's important? To be quite frank about issues of Israel right now in this upcoming election, I'm desperately more concerned about Neil Gorsuch, about health care, about the environment of my country, than right now I am concerned about J Street issues. And I want to know what the Democratic Party is going to do to win and prevent itself from killing itself as it engaging in fratricidal kind of crap that has impeded us in the past.
One thing I'll say on the last question there, are we ready to do? I've worked on, as I mentioned earlier, I'd worked on 4 presidential campaigns. And the party leadership has to cover from the left to the right, the blue dogs to the extreme left. And so you kind of get mush. But when you have a presidential nominee, that's the person who drives the agenda. And it's different than the way the Republicans do it, because they just take their orders and salute. And so you have to look at what is the Democratic Party leadership going to look like in 2020. And there are so many fantastic candidates. This president's going to be a one-term president. We're going to take back the House in 2018 and take back the White House in 2020 with a narrative that answers your question. Who that's going to be, from Joe Biden to Bernie Sanders to the young Joe Kennedy and the mayor of Los Angeles, we have so many great candidates that are running. But until you have somebody who can grasp that narrative, it's Bill Clinton did it in 92, Barack Obama did it in 2008. It's really frustrating in the meantime. But you're going to be, I think, ecstatic about who the nominee is in 2020, and they're going to drive a message that is clear and value-based and putting us back on the right side of history again, having veered so far off to the wrong side. I'm very bullish about where we're headed in this country.
Okay. So, well, let's see. First, about the escrow fund thing. By all means, bring me, your bill, your legislation. I don't know if anybody's working on that. I would love to take a look at it. I should tell you, and something Nancy will discover when she comes to Congress, we're very committee focused. So I am not on the Foreign Relations Committee. I'm not on the Armed Services Committee. I'm on the House Judiciary Committee. I'm on the Committee on Government Oversight and Reform. And so, any proposal relating to the Mideast is going to have the most success coming out of the committees of jurisdiction. Also, my only other political caveat for you to think about there is that I have seen so many proposals as I've gotten into Congress come in that immediately become polarized and divisive, that are on particular components of what's going on in the region. I would love to see something that can bring everybody together to get us back on track towards the peace process and the two-state solution. And maybe that's it. I don't know whether it's it or not. So on the political question, I don't know where my friend is who was asking that question, but there, yeah. Thank you for that question. I think it's the essential one that we have to answer over the next seven or 8 months. But let me tell you, the signs are great, and I'll tell you why. Because I know how Republicans win. Republicans, they don't have voter registration drives at country clubs, okay? They just go register, okay? They raise as much money as they can from Koch brothers and all of the different sources, and then they spend it on propaganda to drive fear and anxiety in the public, okay? We can't be the mirror image of that. We cannot and should not be able to win by raising as much money as possible and going and spending it on TV. Democrats win when Democrats organize and go door to door, and we did it in Virginia, and we have a Democratic governor and lieutenant governor and attorney general in Virginia now. We did it in New Jersey. We did it in Alabama, where we beat Roy Moore, and we have a U.S. senator from Alabama. We did it in Minnesota. We did it in Western Pennsylvania with Connor Lamb, people running and working locally, coming together the way that people did in Connor Lamb's district. He was sworn in this last week and talked about how all these labor unions that had always been fighting and divided came together for him to say, we are going to get behind a candidate who stands up for America's middle class, for Social Security, for Medicare, for Medicaid, for the things that America's built. So I think that we're in the process of doing that. And I think that the indivisible groups, the Do the Most Good, all of these pop-up Tocquevillian civil society groups that have formed since Trump was elected have shown us the way. Organize. Show us that you're serious, okay? And it's not just a question of giving money to consultants and pollsters and coming back with a few magic words. That's not the kind of politics we're fighting for. We're fighting for a progressive politics where people are in motion all over the country where people get into office are accountable to the people who voted for them, and we're making progress together. So I think that we're in the middle of it. It's happening. I'll put in one final plug for Democracy Summer, because I think that we've got to invest in the energy and the idealism of the young people, connect them to prior generations who have made so much good stuff happen. And I will close by quoting my favorite, Tom Paine, who said, and I'm going to just update the language a little bit for modern sensibilities, but he said, "These are the times that try men and women's souls. These are the times that try our souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country, but everyone who stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end is our victory." That victory will be ours in November.
That seems like a good note to close on. Thank you again to our panelists. Susan Rice, our former National Security Advisor, will be speaking in the main ballroom in about 7 or 9 minutes, so make your way over there, and thank you all.